Hell's Angel invited poor ex to shame her at his wedding. But she arrived in a limo with a mafia boss. A biker golden boy invites his broke ex to humiliate her in front of the whole club. But the doors swing open, and she steps out of a black limo on the arm of a mafia boss. The room goes quiet. The toast turns cruel. The kiss he gives her shuts it down and makes a deadly promise. Cameras flash. Deals crack. Someone close is selling secrets. Forced to play fiancé for protection, she sees the truth behind the suit. The monster is gentle only with her and brutal to anyone else. Then she finds a hidden file that says she was never an accident. The clubhouse wants her as bait. The docks are a trap. One man will bleed to keep her breathing if she lets him. So why did the biker really invite her? What's on that file he doesn't want her to see? And when the floodlights hit the river, will this fake engagement save her life or start a war she can't escape? The late afternoon rain drummed against the Bayview Diner's windows as Grace wiped down the last table from the lunch rush. Her fingers brushed against something in her apron pocket, the cream-colored envelope she'd been trying to forget all day. The gilt edges caught the fluorescent lighting, making it seem more expensive than it probably was. Just like Maddox. She pulled it out, scanning the embossed text again. Saturday at 5 p.m., the church's name and address were printed in flowing script, but it was the handwritten note at the bottom that made her stomach twist. "See what you missed." Maddox's scratchy handwriting hadn't changed. "More coffee, hun?" A regular called from the counter, and Grace welcomed the distraction. As she rounded the counter, the bell above the door chimed. A man in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent stepped in, shaking rain from a black umbrella. He chose a booth by the window, away from the usual crowd. While she poured coffee for the regulars, she couldn't help overhearing their not-so-subtle commentary. "Ain't that Maddox's ex? The one he dumped for that real estate girl?" "Yeah, heard he's getting hitched this weekend. Fancy church wedding and everything." Grace's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression neutral as she approached the suited stranger's table. "Welcome to Bayview. What can I get you?" His dark eyes met hers, assessing but not unkind. "Espresso, if you have it." She nodded, grateful for his quiet manner. When she returned with his drink, he was reading something on his phone, but she noticed how his attention shifted when the regulars' voices carried across the diner again. "Bet she's kicking herself now. From what I heard, he's doing real well with the club." The man, she'd later learned his name was Valerio D'Amico, placed something on the table as he stood to leave. It wasn't just the generous tip, but a business card with a handwritten message on the back. "If you intend to attend, don't go alone." The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and burger orders. By 9, her feet ached as she counted out her tips, the card and invitation burning holes in her apron pocket. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. At home, a pink notice glared from her apartment door. Final notice. Rent past due. She yanked it down, adding it to her growing collection of bills inside. The studio apartment was small but clean, though the bathroom light flickered ominously. Another thing she couldn't afford to fix. The hot shower helped ease her muscles, but not her mind. Wrapped in her threadbare robe, she sat cross-legged on her bed, studying the invitation. The church's number was printed at the bottom. Before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed. "Good evening, St. Michael's Parish," a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, I'm calling to confirm an event this Saturday. The Keene wedding?" "Yes, ceremony begins at 5 p.m. sharp. Are you with the bride's party or the groom's?" Grace's throat tightened. "Just a guest, thank you." She hung up quickly. Real. It was real. Part of her had hoped it was some elaborate prank. She picked up Valerio's card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. The paper was thick, expensive. His phone number was listed below his name, along with a company logo she didn't recognize. Her phone buzzed with a text from her manager. "Need you to cover Saturday breakfast shift. Time and a half." Grace stared at the message. The morning shift ended at 2 p.m. Plenty of time to go home, get ready, and make it to the church by 5. The extra money would help with the rent, and keeping busy might stop her from talking herself out of going. "Okay," she typed back. She changed into her sleep shirt and climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The invitation sat on her nightstand, beside Valerio's card, her phone open to the RSVP page. The cursor blinked at her, waiting for an answer. Her thumb hovered over attending. The neon sign from the convenience store across the street cast pink shadows on her ceiling. She thought about Maddox's smirk when he'd ended things, how he'd said she wasn't club material, how he'd replaced her within a week with someone who looked better on the back of his bike. The rational part of her brain said to delete the invitation, pick up an extra shift instead, and forget about the whole thing. But the part of her that was tired of shrinking, tired of letting Maddox's ghost haunt her self-worth, wanted to walk into that church with her head high. Her eyes drifted to Valerio's card again. There had been something in his manner today, a quiet authority, an awareness that seemed to take in everything without judgment. His warning about not going alone echoed in her mind. She wondered what he knew that she didn't. The clock on her phone showed 12:17 a.m., another sleepless night stretching ahead, filled with questions she couldn't answer. Should she call the number on the card? Was she really considering walking into what felt increasingly like a trap? And why did the thought of seeing Maddox marry someone else still have the power to tie her stomach in knots? Her thumb still hovered over the screen, that single word waiting for her decision: attending. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when Grace pushed through the diner's back door at 7 a.m. Her reflection in the chrome coffee maker showed dark circles under her eyes, evidence of a night spent tossing and turning, second-guessing her decision to click attending. The breakfast rush brought the usual parade of hungover college students and early bird seniors, but the two men who slid into the corner booth at 9 made her pause. Their dark coats were perfectly pressed, their shoes gleaming despite the morning's dampness. They ordered espresso in accented English, watching her with polite attention that somehow made her more nervous than rudeness would have. "Miss Calder," the older one said as she set down their cups. "A car will be waiting at 3:30 if you intend to attend the ceremony." She nearly dropped the sugar dispenser. "How did you—" "Mr. D'Amico is thorough." The younger man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The car will be black, armored, you won't miss it." The rest of her shift passed in a blur of pancakes and coffee refills. Her coworker Jenny shot her curious looks when she ducked into the staff bathroom at 2:30 with a garment bag. But Grace ignored the questions. The black dress was a lucky thrift store find, classic cut, good bones. A little worn at the hem maybe, but it hugged her curves in a way that made her feel almost confident. She dabbed concealer under her eyes, added mascara, and twisted her hair into something approaching elegant. The woman in the mirror looked almost ready to face whatever game Maddox was playing. Almost. At 3:28, she stepped outside, her practical flats tucked into her bag. The promised car was impossible to miss, a stretch limousine that gleamed like wet ink. A uniformed driver opened the door, revealing a petite woman with a professional kit spread across the seat beside her. "I'm Elena," the woman said, patting the leather beside her. "We have 40 minutes to make you stunning. Oh, and these are for you." She handed Grace a midnight blue velvet box. Inside, diamond drops winked up at her, the kind of earrings she'd only seen in magazine spreads. "I can't—" "They're on loan," Elena said firmly, already reaching for Grace's hair. "Now sit still." The drive passed in a whirl of expert hands, smoothing her hair into glossy waves, fixing the dress's hem with tiny, precise stitches, and applying makeup that somehow looked both natural and flawless. Grace tried not to think about what all this would cost, or why someone would go to such trouble. St. Helena's Chapel rose against the afternoon sky like something from a fairy tale, all Gothic spires and stained glass. And there, waiting at the curb like he'd stepped out of a magazine himself, stood Valerio D'Amico. The charcoal suit moved like liquid smoke as he stepped forward to open her door. His expression gave nothing away, but something in his eyes made her breath catch. Without a word, he offered his arm. The chapel's foyer hummed with pre-wedding chatter. Heads turned as they entered, conversations stuttering to silence before erupting in urgent whispers. Grace caught fragments as they passed. "D'Amico himself. Thought he never attended—" "Isn't that Maddox's ex—" She kept her chin high, grateful for Valerio's steady presence beside her. The borrowed earrings caught the light from the stained glass windows, sending prisms dancing across her collarbones. Near the altar, Maddox held court in his wedding finery, surrounded by leather-clad club members who looked uncomfortable in their formal wear. His bride, tall, blonde, wearing more diamonds than taste, laughed too loudly at something he said. The enforcer everyone called Grinder loomed behind them, his suit straining across massive shoulders. Grace saw the moment Maddox spotted her. His face went slack with surprise before twisting into something ugly. He recovered quickly, raising his champagne glass in a mock toast. "Practicing for later," she heard him say to his crowd of admirers. "When I thank my ex for showing me what I didn't want." Valerio's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her arm. Before she could respond, the organist struck a chord that resonated through the chapel's bones. The wedding party scattered to their places as the bride appeared at the back of the church, a vision in white lace and attitude. As the woman began her procession down the aisle, Valerio's fingers found Grace's, threading through them with deliberate care. The touch was both gentle and possessive, a clear message to anyone watching, which, Grace realized as the whispers around them died, was exactly the point. She risked a glance up at him, but his expression remained unreadable, his attention seemingly fixed on the ceremony beginning before them. Only the warm pressure of his hand in hers betrayed any awareness of the stir they'd caused. The bride floated past in a cloud of tulle and expensive perfume. Grace felt Maddox's gaze burning into them from the altar, saw Grinder's meaty hands clench into fists, but for the first time since receiving that gilt-edged invitation, she felt steady, protected. The organ's music swelled, filling the vaulted ceiling with sound. Valerio's thumb traced a small circle on her palm, so subtle it might have been unconscious. Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and something tight in her chest began to unwind. Whatever game was being played here, she realized, she wasn't just a pawn anymore. She'd walked into St. Helena's chapel on the arm of someone even Maddox wouldn't dare cross. Someone who'd arranged for a car, a stylist, borrowed diamonds, all to ensure she arrived looking not just presentable, but powerful. The question was, why? The crystal flute chimed as Maddox tapped it, his smile sharp as broken glass. The reception hall quieted, faces turning toward the head table where he stood, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "I want to thank everyone who helped shape my path to this perfect moment," he drawled, his gaze fixing on Grace across the room. "Especially those charitable souls who showed me exactly what not to want in life." Laughter rippled through the crowd, predominantly from the leather-clad cluster of club members. Grace felt the heat of dozens of eyes on her, but kept her spine straight, fingers clenched around her water glass. "To learning from our mistakes," Maddox raised his glass higher, "and trading up." The club's laughter grew louder, crueler, until it didn't. Valerio's crystal flute met his plate with a soft, bored tap. The sound shouldn't have carried over the noise, but somehow it did. Or maybe it was the way he lifted Grace's hand to his lips, pressing a deliberate kiss to her knuckles while his dark eyes held Maddox's. The message was clear. Laugh at her again, and it won't be funny. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Grace excused herself shortly after, needing air that didn't taste like mockery and expensive champagne. The corridor outside the reception hall was cooler, dimmer, empty, except for, "Well, if it ain't the little troublemaker herself." Grinder emerged from an alcove, blocking her path. Up close, he was even more massive, his suit straining across shoulders built for violence. "You're either club history or you're mafia business now," he hissed, looming closer. "Neither ends well for pretty little things like you." Grace lifted her chin. "I'm neither. I'm just leaving." "Sure about that?" His grin was all teeth. "Because from where I'm standing." "Then perhaps you should stand elsewhere." Valerio's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Grace hadn't heard him approach, but suddenly he was there, one hand settling at the small of her back. Grinder's face went carefully blank as he stepped aside. Camera flashes greeted them as they re-entered the reception. A man Grace recognized from local society columns lowered his phone with a satisfied smirk. Within the hour, she knew her face would be splashed across gossip sites alongside speculation about Valerio D'Amico's mysterious new companion. The bride's father watched their return with undisguised hostility. He was a heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl, and Grace noticed how Valerio's security detail subtly shifted positions, tightening their perimeter. Something about pipeline deals floated through her memory, fragments of business news she'd barely registered at the time. The reception dragged on, a glittering facade over currents of tension. By 8:40, Grace had reached her limit. She murmured an excuse about getting some air and slipped away toward the parking structure, planning a quiet exit. She made it halfway there before footsteps echoed behind her. Two men in riding leather emerged from the shadows, their casual pace anything but casual. "Need an escort, sweetheart," the taller one called. "Service exits this way." Grace's heart hammered as she quickened her steps. The bikers matched her pace, spreading out to flank her. Then several things happened very fast. Two figures in dark suits materialized from nowhere. There was a brief scuffle, the sound of bodies hitting concrete, and suddenly the bikers were face down and very, very still. Inside, Valerio's voice came from behind her, brooking no argument. You're leaving with me. Grace found herself hustled through a side door and down a series of corridors, Valerio's hand firm at her elbow. His security team moved around them like a well-oiled machine, speaking in clipped tones through earpieces. The limo waited at a private exit, engine purring. Grace barely registered being guided inside, her mind still processing the last few minutes. The city lights began sliding past the tinted windows, painting strange patterns across her stunned reflection. Valerio sat across from her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes intent. "You just stepped into a war," he said evenly. "Let's keep you alive." The words hung in the air between them as the limo glided through Seattle's nighttime streets. Grace stared at her hands, which had finally stopped shaking. The borrowed diamonds at her ears caught the passing lights, throwing tiny rainbows across the leather interior. She thought about her morning shift at the diner, only 12 hours ago, but feeling like another lifetime. Thought about the guilt-edged invitation that had seemed like such a simple choice. Go or don't go. Show up or stay away. Now she was in the back of a Mafia boss's limo, wearing borrowed jewelry worth more than her annual salary. While somewhere behind them, a wedding reception continued as if nothing had happened. As if two men hadn't just tried to drag her out a service exit. As if Valerio's security team hadn't appeared exactly when needed, moving with the kind of efficiency that spoke of extensive training. The city continued to scroll past outside, familiar landmarks made strange by the lens of this new reality. Grace watched her reflection watching her, trying to reconcile the composed woman in the perfectly altered black dress with the waitress who'd started her day serving eggs over, easy to the morning crowd. Valerio hadn't moved, hadn't spoken since his declaration. He sat with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to letting silence do his work for him. His presence filled the space between them, dangerous and magnetic. The city lights of Seattle sparkled 30 floors below as Grace followed the housekeeper through Valerio's penthouse. The space breathed old money, all gleaming hardwood and subtle art pieces that probably cost more than her lifetime earnings at the diner. "Please sit," the housekeeper gestured to a leather armchair. "Dr. Chen will be here momentarily." Grace sank into the butter-soft leather, her borrowed diamonds catching the warm light from crystal sconces. Her wrist throbbed where one of the bikers had grabbed her. The memory made her stomach clench. Dr. Chen arrived with quiet efficiency, a petite woman in her 50s who examined Grace's wrist with gentle, clinical touches. Minor bruising, she concluded. Ice and anti-inflammatory medication should suffice. The housekeeper returned with a silver tea service, the delicate china, a stark contrast to the sturdy mugs Grace handled at work. Steam curled from the spout, carrying the scent of jasmine. Once they were alone, Valerio stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection overlaying the city vista. "You understand why you can't go home tonight." It wasn't a question. Grace wrapped her hands around the teacup, letting its warmth ground her. "I understand I'm apparently caught in something bigger than a petty ex's wedding drama." He turned, studying her with that unnerving stillness. "The motorcycle club is moving product through channels they shouldn't. Someone in my organization is feeding them information. Your connection to their leader made you an opportunity they couldn't resist." "I was bait," Grace said flatly. "You were leverage they failed to acquire." He moved to sit across from her, every motion precise. "I have a proposition that benefits us both." Grace set down her cup with a soft clink. "I'm listening." "Be my fiancé, 1 month, public appearances, photographs, the expected social calendar. It will draw out whoever's feeding information to the club." She barked a laugh. "That's your solution. Pretend to be engaged. In exchange, I'll clear your debts and ensure the club never troubles you again." His tone made it clear this wasn't charity. It was business. Grace studied him, mind racing. The rent notice on her door, the constant struggle to stay ahead of student loans. The way Maddox's crew had been making her life difficult even before tonight. "I have conditions," she said finally. Valerio's expression didn't change. "Name them." "No lies between us. I keep my job at the diner, and no touching unless I initiate it." He nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Agreed. My legal team will draft the necessary documents, both for public appearance and your protection." Grace pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. "I need to contact my manager about shifts." "Use family emergency as the reason," Valerio suggested, already typing on his own device. "Check your banking app." She did, and her breath caught. A transfer had just cleared, enough to cover 3 months' rent from something called the D'Amico Community Foundation. "It's legitimate," he said, reading her expression. "Call your landlord." The call was surreal, her voice steady as she arranged payment as if this were just another Tuesday night, as if she hadn't just agreed to fake marry a mafia boss. A sharp-suited woman arrived with documents at 11 Weiserus p.m., explaining terms and protocols with practiced efficiency. Grace signed where indicated, her signature looking foreign against the heavy legal paper. "The guest rooms are this way," the housekeeper reappeared, leading Grace down a hallway lined with more subtle artwork. The room she opened was bigger than Grace's entire apartment, with its own sitting area and a bathroom that belonged in a magazine. "The master suite is also prepared," the housekeeper added carefully. "This is perfect, thank you." Grace's tone made it clear the discussion was closed. Left alone, she found silk pajamas laid out on the bed and a new phone on the nightstand. A calendar app was already installed, populated with upcoming events. Monday lunch at the Children's Hospital Foundation. Wednesday dinner with Port Authority officials, each entry tagged with dress codes and security protocols. Through the windows, she could see security teams rotating positions on neighboring rooftops. The whole thing felt like a movie, the kind where the ordinary person gets swept into extraordinary circumstances. But she wasn't in a movie. She was Grace Calder, who served coffee with a side of sass and had fought for everything she'd ever had. Who'd walked away from Maddox rather than become his club trophy. She set her alarm for 6 a.m., muscle memory from years of opening shifts. The legal agreement sat face down on the nightstand, its weight already shaping her new reality. "I will not be anyone's ornament," she whispered to herself, a promise in the quiet room. The city continued its nighttime pulse below, unaware that in a penthouse above, a waitress and a crime lord had just rewritten both their stories. Grace stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Borrowed diamonds now removed, borrowed strength still in place. She thought about the diner, about her regular customers who trusted her to remember their orders and their stories, about the life she'd built, modest but hers. 1 month of playing pretend wouldn't change who she was. She'd make sure of that. The bed was obscenely comfortable, the sheets probably worth more than her car. Grace lay back, letting her body sink into luxury while her mind stayed sharp. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, photographers, public appearances, the weight of Valerio's world pressing against hers. But tonight, in this quiet moment between her old life and whatever came next, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to acknowledge the strange path that had led her here, from a spiteful wedding invitation to a contract that might solve her problems while creating entirely new ones. Security cameras blinked steadily from discreet corners. Somewhere in the penthouse, Valerio was likely reviewing reports or making calls, planning moves in a game Grace was now part of, whether she liked it or not. The treadmill hummed beneath Grace's feet at 6:20 a.m., her steady rhythm matching the city's awakening pulse 20 floors below. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, dawn painted the skyline in watercolor hues, but she couldn't help missing her usual route along the harbor. 2 security teams maintained positions on adjacent rooftops, their presence a constant reminder of why she was running in place instead of feeling the wind on her face. At 7 a.m., she showered and called Amy, her voice carefully casual as her younger cousin answered with sleep-thick confusion. "Hey, Squirt, just wanted to let you know I might be hard to reach this month. I'm safe, okay? Working on something important." "Grace? What's going on? I saw those pictures from the wedding. I'll explain everything soon. Promise you'll stay away from the diner for now." Amy's silence spoke volumes. "You're really okay?" "Better than okay. Just busy. Love you, pest." By noon, Grace stood in her tiny studio apartment, 2 broad-shouldered men in dark suits positioned outside her door like bookends. She moved through the familiar space, gathering essentials, work uniforms, comfortable shoes, the few nice outfits she owned. Her fingers brushed the lucky seashell on her nightstand, a reminder of childhood beach trips before her parents split when life was simpler. She tucked it into her bag without explanation. The restaurant at 2 p.m. was all polished wood and discreet alcoves. A woman named Marina, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and sharp eyes, drilled Grace on donor names and social protocols. Mrs. Henderson chairs 3 hospital boards and lost a son to leukemia. Mr. Chen's grandchildren attend St. Mary's, the Donovans. Marina paused, assessing Grace's expression. "You're grimacing." "I'm trying to look pleasant." "You're trying too hard. Think of something that genuinely makes you happy, then dial it back 30%. These people don't want sunshine. They want quiet confidence." Grace thought of early mornings at the diner, the satisfaction of perfectly timed orders and grateful smiles. She adjusted her expression, earning Marina's approving nod. The warehouse district was a maze of shadows by 10 p.m. Valerio guided her through a side entrance, his hand hovering near but not touching the small of her back. "The Foundation stores medical supplies here," he explained, voice echoing in the vast space. "Distribution centers for—" The first shot shattered fluorescent lights overhead. Grace barely registered Valerio's movement. One moment beside her, the next shoving her behind a steel column as return fire erupted. His men materialized from concealed positions, their coordinated response suggesting this inspection had been a calculated trap. Grace pressed against cold metal, heart thundering as bullets sparked off concrete. Through strobing muzzle flashes, she glimpsed Valerio in action, each movement precise, each shot purposeful. He fought like he did everything else, with controlled intensity and ruthless efficiency. When silence finally fell, he returned to her side. His touch turned gentle as he tilted her face, examining a small cut where flying glass had nicked her cheek. The tenderness in his voice as he murmured, "Minor scratch," felt more jarring than the violence had been. They didn't speak during the ride back, but Grace noticed his hands remained steady on the steering wheel while hers couldn't stop shaking. By 1 a.m., they sat at the kitchen island, steam rising from ceramic mugs between them. "You planned that," she said finally. "Used me as bait." "Yes." No excuses, no justification. "Tell me why." "We needed to confirm which of our warehouse staff was compromised. Having you there made the trap believable. They wouldn't expect me to risk a civilian unless the inspection was genuine." Grace wrapped her fingers around her mug, absorbing its warmth. "Did you get what you needed?" 3 arrests, 2 deaths, the leak is sealed." Their hands rested inches apart on the marble surface, close enough to share heat but not touching. The city glittered beyond dark windows, a constellation of artificial stars. At 1:30 a.m., Valerio stood to switch off the pendant lights, plunging the kitchen into shadow. Grace watched his reflection in the window, broad shoulders, elegant posture, dangerous grace. The same hands that had dealt death hours ago had cleaned her cut with impossible gentleness. Understanding clicked. He wore gloves in the field not to hide evidence, but to maintain separation between necessary violence and chosen tenderness. The monster knew exactly where he needed to be gentle. She couldn't look away from their overlapped reflections in the glass. The waitress and the crime lord, both wearing masks that were starting to feel less like disguises and more like mirrors showing complicated truths. His reflection met her gaze, held it, neither of them pretending this was still just about contracts and convenience. The warehouse scene replayed in her mind, his instant shift from lethal to protective, the way he'd positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation, the careful distance he maintained now, honoring her conditions while his eyes said something entirely different. In the dark kitchen, with the weight of the night's violence still settling around them, Grace realized she was seeing all his faces at once: the businessman, the fighter, the strategist who used her as bait, and the man who treated her boundaries like law, the monster who chose his battlegrounds, and the protector who checked her for scratches. Their reflections stood frozen in the window, separate but overlapping, while the city's lights painted shadows between them like secrets waiting to be voiced. The apartment hummed with quiet systems, security feeds, climate control, the subtle machinery of Valerio's world, while Grace's lucky seashell sat in her bag upstairs, a small piece of her own reality now, merged with his. Monday morning brought a whirlwind of activity to the penthouse. At 8 sharp, a stylist named Petra wheeled in a rack of designer dresses while Marcus, the head of security, outlined the day's protective measures with military precision. "The car will be here at 11:30, Marcus said, checking his tablet. "Direct route to the Belmont Hotel for the charity luncheon." Grace, still nursing her first coffee, raised her hand like a student. "Actually, I need to keep my Tuesday and Thursday dinner shifts at the diner." Marcus's expression tightened. "Ms. Calder, given recent events—" "Non-negotiable," she interrupted, meeting his gaze. "But we can compromise. Park the driver across the street. Plain clothes, regular car. My coworkers don't need the drama." While they hammered out details, Petra held up a crimson sheath dress. This would suit the luncheon. Classic but not stuffy. Grace ran her fingers over the silk. "How much?" "Mr. D'Amico's account." "No." Grace selected a navy dress instead. "This one's more appropriate for fundraising, and it's within my budget." Petra and Marcus exchanged looks, but Grace stood firm. She'd wear the role of fiancé, but not as a decoration bought and paid for. By noon, she was navigating the Belmont's grand ballroom, the navy dress moving like water as she worked the room. Years of reading diner customers served her well. She could spot the real decision-makers among the social butterflies. She cornered Thomas Wheeler, a banker known for his charitable giving, during the first course. While others discussed vacation homes, Grace pulled out a napkin and sketched her vision for a women's shelter. The existing facility's overcrowded, she explained, drawing floor plans. With seed funding, we could retrofit the old Morrison building. 20 more beds, on-site counseling, job training. Wheeler leaned forward, intrigued. Ambitious scope. You've clearly done your homework. I believe in being prepared. Grace added details about zoning and staffing. The foundation could match donations. When Valerio arrived, fashionably late from morning meetings, he caught the tail end of Wheeler's pledge. His subtle nod of approval sent an unexpected warmth through Grace's chest. The diner felt like stepping into another world at 4 o'clock. Grace tied on her apron, grounding herself in the familiar rhythm of orders and coffee refills. Her manager, Linda, pulled her aside between tickets. Those wedding photos are everywhere, Linda murmured. But I'm running interference. No names, no gossip. Grace squeezed her shoulder in thanks. You're a good boss. Just be careful, honey. That's a different league you're playing in. The dinner rush kept her too busy for worrying. By closing time, her feet ached pleasantly, and the simple tasks had cleared her head. Security whisked her to the penthouse, where she found Valerio in his office reviewing reports. The space screamed efficiency, all chrome and glass, devoid of personal touches. Your decor could use some warmth, she commented, perching on his desk's edge. It's like a surgical suite in here. He set down his pen. Function over form. Says the man wearing a $3,000 suit. Grace pulled out the napkin from lunch, now bearing Wheeler's signature. Speaking of function, she crossed to the empty bulletin board and deliberately taped the napkin in its center. There, now it has a purpose. Valerio stood, moving to examine her impromptu display. Wheeler's known for scrutinizing projects before committing. You impressed him. The shelter's needed. These women deserve a chance to rebuild. Take the lead publicly, he said, studying her face. After our arrangement ends, the foundation will match Wheeler's pledge and endow operating costs. Grace blinked, surprised by the offer's scale. You're serious? I don't make hollow promises. His eyes held hers. You have vision and people trust you. Use it. The air felt charged between them, heavy with things unsaid. Grace was acutely aware of their proximity, the way his presence seemed to fill the austere office with sudden warmth. I should get some sleep, she said finally. Early shift tomorrow. Valerio stepped back, giving her space. Of course. They parted at 11, heading to separate wings of the penthouse. Grace paused in her doorway, glancing back to where light still spilled from his office. The napkin pledge fluttered in the air conditioning's soft breath, like a tiny flag claiming territory in his sterile domain. She thought about the day's contrasts, designer dresses and diner aprons, charity luncheons and coffee refills, the sharp businessman and the man who noticed her shelter plans. Each piece felt real, none quite complete on its own. The awareness between them hummed like a live wire, impossible to ignore but not yet ready to be acknowledged. Grace closed her door, leaving the day's complications in the hallway. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now she had marked his space with something that mattered, and he had let her do it. In his office, Valerio worked late into the night, the napkin's presence drawing his eye whenever he looked up. Its placement was deliberate, a small act of defiance, a reminder that his temporary fiancé refused to be merely decorative. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly as he returned to his reports, the sterile room somehow warmer for her intervention. The Port Authority's chandeliers cast honeyed light across the dining room, turning everyone golden. Grace smoothed her midnight blue gown, anchoring herself in the weight of borrowed sapphires at her throat. The stones felt cool and heavy against her skin, a constant reminder of the world she was temporarily inhabiting. 3 hours of small talk stretched ahead. She could do this. She'd survived fundraisers with handsy donors and charity galas with competitive socialites. This was just another performance. Valerio's hand settled at the small of her back, warm through silk. The heat of his palm radiated through the delicate fabric, making her skin tingle beneath his touch. Ready? His voice was low, meant only for her ears, his breath stirring the loose curls by her temple. She nodded, letting him guide her through the crowd of shipping magnates and city officials. The room smelled of expensive cologne, whiskey, and the faint metallic scent of money. They'd practiced this dance all week. The gentle touches, the fond glances, the careful distance that suggested intimacy without crossing lines. Hours spent rehearsing stories of how they met, inside jokes they supposedly shared, preferences they'd memorized about each other. But tonight felt different, charged with something neither had planned, an electric current humming beneath their well-rehearsed performance. "The happy couple," Commissioner Roberts boomed, lifting his whiskey. The amber liquid caught the light as he raised his crystal tumbler. His face was flushed from alcohol, his eyes sharp with curiosity. "When's the wedding?" "We're enjoying a long engagement," Valerio answered smoothly, his thumb tracing circles on Grace's spine. The casual possessiveness sent shivers up her neck, goosebumps rising despite the room's warmth. His voice carried just the right note of affectionate patience, as though they'd discussed this question 100 times. She leaned into him, playing her part, her body fitting against his side as if they'd been together for years. "Some things shouldn't be rushed." The words came naturally, her smile genuine despite herself. Their eyes met, and for a moment the pretense slipped. Heat flared between them, real and unexpected, something raw and honest cutting through their careful charade. Grace caught her breath, steadying herself with a sip of champagne. The bubbles fizzed on her tongue, sharp and bright like her sudden awareness of him. Through dinner, they maintained the facade while threading through shipping contract discussions. The conversation flowed around the table, complex negotiations disguised as casual conversation over 7 courses of exquisite food that Grace barely tasted. She redirected attention when negotiations grew tense, sensing the undercurrents and smoothly changing subjects before tempers flared. Valerio softened his edges when she spoke about community projects, his usual predatory focus transforming into something that looked remarkably like pride. They moved like dancers who'd rehearsed for years, not days, anticipating each other's needs with uncanny precision. "You're natural at this," he murmured during dessert, voice low enough for only her ears. His lips barely moved, his eyes on the port director across the table, while his attention remained fixed entirely on her. "So are you," she whispered back, using her dessert spoon as cover. The chocolate mousse melted on her tongue, rich and bittersweet. Almost. Too good. By 8, the formal portion wound down. Grace's cheeks ached from smiling, and the room felt too warm, too crowded. The constant performance had left her drained, longing for space and silence. Valerio noticed. He always noticed those dark eyes missing nothing, and suggested air. The riverside garden was empty, string lights twinkling above manicured paths like earthbound stars. The harbor's sounds drifted up, water lapping against the docks, distant horns, the city's heartbeat pulsing beneath it all. Grace kicked off her heels, letting dewy grass cool her feet. The relief was immediate, grounding her after hours of floating through social currents. "Better?" Valerio asked, jacket draped over one arm. In the gentle lighting, with his tie loosened and collar unbuttoned, he looked almost approachable, almost ordinary, if you ignored the danger that clung to him like a second skin. "Much." She watched boats' lights dance on the water, hypnotic in their swaying motion. Her borrowed diamonds caught the light with every breath. "Though I'm getting dangerously good at being your fiancé." "I've noticed." He stepped closer, close enough that his cologne, cedar, and something darker, something that reminded her of thunderstorms, wrapped around her. His presence filled the space between them, making the garden seem smaller. The line between pretense and truth grows thinner. Grace turned to face him, pulse quickening beneath the sapphires. "Does that worry you?" "It should." His eyes traced her face, lingering on her lips, her eyes, as if memorizing her features. The intensity of his gaze made her feel both exposed and cherished. "I'm not a gentle man, Grace. What I keep, I break." "I'm not made of glass." She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated by his warnings. The night air cooled her heated skin as she stood her ground. "And you're not as ruthless as you pretend?" "With you?" His hand cupped her cheek, callous thumb brushing her lower lip. The tenderness in the gesture contradicted his next words. "No, but that makes me more dangerous, not less." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. His lips brushed hers, testing, asking. The gentleness surprised her. This man who commanded with iron control now waited for permission. Grace answered by rising on her toes, fingers curling in his crisp shirt. She could feel his heartbeat hammering against her palm, matching her own frantic rhythm. The gentle start burned away in seconds. Valerio backed her against a stone column, cold against the bare skin of her shoulders. One hand tangled in her hair, carefully avoiding mussing the elaborate updo. The other at her waist, fingers splayed possessively. Grace gasped into his mouth, and he deepened the kiss, claiming, promising. This was no performance for watching eyes. This was surrender, freely given and equally shared, honest in a way their practiced touches had never been. When they broke apart, breathing hard, the world had shifted. Grace touched her lips, still tingling from the pressure of his mouth. Valerio's usual control looked beautifully fractured, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them, his breathing uneven. "We should return," he said roughly, but his hands stayed at her waist, contradicting his words. "We should," she agreed, making no move to leave the circle of his arms. The party continued inside, but it felt like a different universe now. He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed like a man in prayer. "This changes things." It was always going to. She whispered the truth they'd both been avoiding since the first day. The drive home passed in charged silence, their fingers linked on the leather seat between them. Streetlights painted stripes across their joined hands, highlighting then shadowing the connection. Grace's skin hummed with awareness, with possibilities not yet explored but clearly promised. Every red light felt like torture, every acceleration like anticipation. At the penthouse, she changed into an oversized sleep shirt, mind still spinning with the memory of his lips, his hands, his whispered confessions. Sleep felt impossible, with electricity still crackling under her skin. She padded to Valerio's office, carrying the donor list from dinner, needing to do something useful with her restless energy. The bulletin board had accumulated more papers this week: profit projections, security reports, and her original napkin sketch pinned in the center like a talisman. The sight of her handwriting amid his ordered world made her smile. She pinned the new list beside it, satisfied to see the shelter funding growing, tangible proof that some good could come from this complicated arrangement. A folder slipped from the stack, spilling contents across the desk with a soft flutter. The club's winged skull logo marked the cover, making her freeze, reality crashing back like a cold wave. As she gathered papers, a small flash drive clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent office. Grace stared at it, conscience warring with curiosity. The kiss in the garden felt like a dream, but this was reality. Secrets and shadows, games within games. Her fingertips hovered over the small device, then closed around it, the plastic warm from the nearby computer. Something told her she needed to know. The desktop hummed to life, its glow harsh in the dark office, casting sharp shadows across the room. She plugged in the drive, telling herself she was paranoid, telling herself she'd laugh at her suspicions, telling herself Valerio deserved her trust after the vulnerability he'd shown tonight. The first photo stopped her heart. There she was, months ago, leaving work while Maddox waited on his bike. Her hair was different then, and she wore the green coat she'd donated last winter. Another showed them arguing outside her apartment, her face twisted in anger, his in contempt. Dozens more followed, all time-stamped, all taken long, before Valerio appeared at her diner with his proposition. The screen's blue light made everything sickly, unreal, transforming her face in the photos to something ghostly and vulnerable. Grace sat perfectly still, staring at dates that proved nothing had been chance, while her heart cracked along fault lines she hadn't known existed. The sapphires she'd removed but hadn't returned sat on the desk beside her, mocking her with their beauty and borrowed worth. On the bulletin board, her shelter plans fluttered in the air conditioning's breath, paper corners lifting and settling like nervous wings. The napkin's edge curled like it was trying to escape, like it knew it had been pinned in place by careful design. Just like her. Just another piece in a game, whose rules she didn't understand, a game that had started long before she knew she was playing. The blue light from the monitor cast harsh shadows as Grace stormed down the hallway, her bare feet silent on marble. She found Valerio in his study, jacket off, sleeves rolled up as he reviewed papers. "Were you tracking me before we met?" Her voice shook. "Did you orchestrate everything?" He looked up, face unreadable. "Not everything." "That's not an answer." Grace slapped the flash drive on his desk. "Those surveillance photos go back months. Was any of this real?" Valerio stood slowly, buttoning his cuff. "I investigate everyone connected to the club's leadership. It's strategy, not personal targeting." Strategy. The word tasted bitter. "So I was just another pressure point to squeeze." Initially. He moved around the desk, but Grace stepped back. "I researched leverage lines. Maddox's ex-girlfriend seemed useful intelligence. I didn't orchestrate his wedding or his attempt to humiliate you. But you used it," her hands clenched. "You saw an opening and played me perfectly." "No," his voice hardened. "I didn't expect you. Your compassion, your strength. I didn't expect to want—" "Stop!" Grace held up a hand. "Just stop! The deal stands because I gave my word. But whatever was starting between us, that's dead." His jaw tightened. "Grace, I need air." She turned away, unable to look at him. The tenderness from the garden felt like ashes in her mouth. The service corridor was cooler, darker. Grace leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The freight elevator hummed nearby. She could hear it ascending, then descending. Regular, predictable, unlike everything else in her life right now. At 11:25, the doors opened. Grace barely registered the men in leather cuts before rough hands grabbed her. She kicked out, but someone pressed a sweet-smelling cloth over her mouth and nose. The world tilted sideways. Her limbs went heavy, unresponsive. Through closing eyes, she saw the skull wings on their jackets as they dragged her into the elevator. Consciousness came and went. Van floor vibrating, voices arguing, cold metal against her cheek. When clarity finally returned, she was in. Darkness, wrists bound with zip ties. The container's metal walls pressed close. Through gaps, Grace could see floodlights cutting across a shipping yard. Somewhere water lapped, they were near the docks. Her head throbbed, mouth cotton dry. Dawn, trade. A man's voice filtered through, familiar from club gatherings. Hawk, the president. D'Amico shows alone or we dump her in the river. Boss wants the docks signed over first. Grinders growl. Then maybe she lives. He'll sign, Hawk sounded satisfied. Man's got a weakness now, stupid to let anyone matter that much. Their footsteps crunched away. Grace tested her bonds, but the plastic only bit deeper. She tried to orient herself, container facing east, based on light angles, 2 guards passing every 12 minutes. The information felt important, so she held on to it. A soft whimper made her freeze. Through a seam in the container wall, she could just make out another unit about 15 feet away. A girl's face appeared briefly. Teenage, terrified, tear-streaked. "Hey," Grace whispered. "Can you hear me?" A pause, then, "Yeah, yes. I'm Grace. What's your name?" "Lily." The voice trembled. "Please, I want to go home." "Listen to me, Lily." Grace pressed closer to the gap. "I promise I won't leave without you, okay? I promise." The girl's sob was barely audible. Grace memorized every detail, guard patterns, container layout, the direction of voices. Her boot toe found the latch mechanism, testing its give, while her mind calculated angles and timing. Time stretched like cold molasses. Grace counted seconds, building a map of movements outside. The zip ties had a weakness if you knew how to work them. The latch had a sweet spot where it caught. All pieces of a puzzle she had to solve before dawn. "Grace?" Lily's whisper barely carried. "Still here." Grace kept her voice steady, projecting calm she didn't feel. "Stay quiet and listen for my signal. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good girl." More footsteps approached, heavier ones. Grace quickly pressed back into shadows as a guard peered through the air slots. The beam of his flashlight swept the space, lingered, moved on. She waited until his steps faded before resuming her careful work on the ties. Her wrists were slick with sweat or blood. She couldn't tell which in the dark. The plastic had to give eventually. Everything had a breaking point. The night air carried sounds from the yard. Engines idling, radio chatter, the hollow echo of boots on metal walkways. Grace logged each detail while her fingers worked. The guard rotation was clockwork, 12 minutes like heartbeats in the dark. She felt Lily's fear radiating through the wall between them. The girl's quiet crying had stopped, replaced by the kind of stillness that came from absolute terror. Grace remembered that stillness from her own childhood. The art of becoming invisible when trapped. "I'm still here," she whispered again, though she wasn't sure Lily could. "Here." The promise felt important to repeat, like a talisman against the dark. "I'm not leaving you." The latch mechanism clicked softly as she tested it with her boot. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the confined space, but no one outside reacted. Grace counted her breaths, matching them to the guard rotations, building her mental map of the yard piece by piece. Dawn was coming. She could feel it in the gradually changing quality of darkness, in the shift of shadows through the container's seams. Time was a razor wire now, cutting both ways. Rescue or river, Hawk had said. Grace intended to cut her own third option before either could happen. Grace's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. Not entirely fake. The panic attack performance started small. Hyperventilation, then escalating to retching sounds. Years of customer service had taught her how to project distress. "Shut up in there!" A guard banged on the container. She ramped up the intensity, adding desperate scratching against metal. The sound would drive anyone crazy. 3 minutes in, she heard muttered curses and footsteps approaching. "If she pukes and dies before the trade, Hawk will have our heads," one guard growled. Metal scraped as they cracked the door. Grace huddled in the shadows, trembling visibly. When the first guard leaned in, flashlight beam sweeping the space, she drove her shoulder forward with every ounce of strength. The impact knocked him off balance. Grace stumbled out into shocking brightness, her bound hands throwing her equilibrium off. Freedom lasted 2 seconds before massive hands seized her shoulders. "Crazy bitch!" The second guard slammed her back inside so hard her teeth rattled, but in the chaos, she'd felt something drop from his jacket pocket. As the door clanged shut, she twisted around, searching with her feet until she found it. A burner phone, screen cracked, but still glowing. Working it open with her boot toe, Grace maneuvered until she could see the keypad. Her shoulders and cheek became awkward typing tools, but she had to try. The message had to be perfect, something only Valerio would understand. 3 weeks ago, they'd shared late-night tea after the warehouse fight. She'd teased him about his first visit to the diner, how he'd ordered the Tuesday special on a Thursday. "You stood out," she'd said. "Nobody orders chicken fried steak with a silent E unless they're trying too hard to seem normal." He'd actually smiled then, admitting his research team had misspelled the menu item in their brief. It had become their private joke, the perfectly imperfect cover. Now, Grace painstakingly typed, 412 chicken fried steak, urgent. The date was his first diner visit. She sent it to the number saved as Pete's late-night delivery, the secure line he'd given her for emergencies. Sweat trickled down her spine as she listened for approaching footsteps. Nothing yet. She managed to slide the phone under some debris, just as voices grew. Louder outside. "Move them now," Hawk ordered. "D'Amico's people will have eyes on every yard by dawn. Get them to the staging area." The container door opened again. This time, Grace didn't resist as they hauled her out. Through the floodlights, she saw them extracting Lily from the other container. The girl's face was tear-streaked but determined. They were loaded into separate vehicles. Grace memorized every turn as they drove, counting seconds between landmarks. When they stopped, the air smelled different. Brackish, heavy with river mud and diesel. Massive cranes loomed overhead, their shadows cutting through security lights. Grace caught glimpses of worn warning signs and stacked shipping containers as they marched her across uneven ground. Lily stumbled nearby, guided by Grinder's meaty hand on her shoulder. "Behind there," Hawk pointed to a pile of tarps. "Tie them properly this time." Across the city, Valerio's phone buzzed. He'd been reviewing security footage frame by frame, searching for how they'd breached his building. The message notification caught his eye. A delivery service he didn't use. The code made his chest tighten. Grace's subtle humor turned into a distress signal. Within minutes, his team confirmed a security breach in the service corridor. Camera blind spots, disabled alarms, inside knowledge. "Show me everyone's movements," he ordered. "Every guard, every servant, every—" He stopped, eyes narrowing at the footage. "Emmanuel, where was my consigliere?" The trusted advisor's patterns emerged. Small irregularities, perfectly timed gaps, phone calls that aligned with club activities. Money traces revealed offshore accounts, regular payments through shell companies. "Watch him," Valerio commanded, "but do not let him know he's made. He'll lead us to them." Emmanuel had been selling routes and schedules, using his position to identify weak points in security. The betrayal burned, but Valerio kept his rage controlled. Grace needed calculated precision now, not emotional revenge. At the staging area, Grace and Lily huddled together behind the tarps. Their new bonds were tighter, but Grace had managed to keep her fingers spread during tying. A small space to work with. "When the guards change shifts," she whispered to Lily, "they'll be distracted. The crane booth is 40 feet up, but it has a radio and emergency protocols." "I'm scared," Lily admitted. "Me too, but being scared doesn't mean we can't be brave." Grace watched the guards' patterns through gaps in the tarps. They were getting sloppy, tired of babysitting duty. One kept checking his phone, while another smoked constantly. "Top of the hour," she murmured to Lily. "That's when we move. Remember what I told you about running in a zigzag? And if I say drop instantly," Lily finished. "No hesitation?" Grace nodded, pride mixing with worry. The girl was holding it together better than most adults would. In the distance, she heard boats on the river. Normal port traffic, but each one could be carrying help or harm. The night air grew heavier as 2:30 a.m. approached. Grace worked steadily at her bonds while explaining the escape plan again. Their window would be small, but it had to work. She refused to be a bargaining chip in someone else's war. "Grace?" Lily's whisper was barely audible. "Yeah? Thank you for not leaving me." Grace squeezed the girl's hand as best she could through their restraints. "I promised, didn't I? Now remember, wait for my signal, then run like hell." Grace's watch ticked to 3 a.m. The guard shift change began with lazy footsteps and muttered complaints about the cold. She squeezed Lily's hand twice. Their signal. "Now," she whispered. They burst from behind the tarps, Grace half dragging Lily toward the crane's steel stairs. Their partially loosened bonds gave them just enough mobility. The first shout of alarm came as they hit the third step. "Move! Move!" Grace urged, pushing Lily ahead of her. Metal rang beneath their feet. Grace's thighs burned as they climbed, the service ladder seeming endless in the dark. Somewhere below, boots thundered on metal. An alarm began to wail, harsh and mechanical. The crane booth loomed above them, a metal box suspended against the stars. Grace's fingers, numb from the restraints, fumbled with the door latch. Inside, they found a cramped space filled with controls and radio equipment. Grace's hands shook as she pulled out the burner phone, typing quickly. "High perch, 2 rifle nests, floodlights." She hit send, then brought her heel down hard on the booth's keypad. Plastic cracked and circuits sparked. "What now?" Lily asked, breath coming in short gasps. "We wait, and we watch." Below, the dock exploded into activity. Flashlight beams swept the crane's base while voices barked orders. Grace counted at least 12 men, plus the 2 rifle positions she'd spotted on her way up. Elevated platforms with clear sightlines to the exchange point. Through the booth's grimy windows, she watched Hawk pace, gesturing as he spoke into a phone. His voice carried faintly. "Dawn exchange, non-negotiable, both girls or no deal." Time crawled. Grace kept Lily away from the windows, telling her stories about the diner to keep her calm. The sky began to lighten, turning the river from black to steely gray. At 4:20 a.m., Hawk gathered his men. Grace strained to hear through the booth's thin walls. "D'Amico arrives at first light," he announced. "He'll sign over the dock rights. Properly witnessed, properly filed. Once that's done, we give him his little waitress." He paused, letting his next words land heavily. "Then our friends up high make sure none of them leave." Grinder's laugh echoed off the containers. "About time we put D'Amico down." "The girl sees everything," another voice added. "Smart setup." Grace's stomach clenched. They planned to massacre Valerio's people under cover of a legitimate exchange. She looked at Lily, wondering if the girl understood what was coming. The teenager's face was pale but composed. The eastern sky turned pearl gray, then pink. At 5:15 a.m., car engines rumbled in the distance. Grace pressed against the window, watching Valerio emerge from a black SUV. He moved with contained violence, face carved from ice. Behind him, Emmanuel and 4 guards fanned out with practiced precision. "That's him?" Lily whispered. "The man from the photos?" Grace nodded. Even from this height, she could read the lethal promise in his stance. Other vehicles arrived, lawyers with briefcases, witnesses to make the exchange legitimate. Hawk positioned his people carefully, 2 at each access point, others behind container stacks, and the rifle nests waiting silent above. Emmanuel drifted to a spot directly below the crane, as if positioning himself to help Grace down. The floodlight snapped on at 5:30 a.m., harsh white light banishing the dawn shadows. Grace saw Hawk's hand rise, signaling the rifle nests. In that frozen moment, she grabbed the crane's main lever, the one she'd spent hours studying while they waited. Steel screamed as she yanked it hard. The crane's arm swung, its suspended container moving like a pendulum. The massive box swept across one of the rifle positions, forcing the shooter to abandon his perch with a shout. Chaos erupted below. Grace grabbed Lily's hand and yanked her toward the door. They had to move while everyone was distracted. Emmanuel appeared at the bottom of the stairs, waving urgently. "This way," he called. "Quick, to the truck." Something in his voice made Grace hesitate. He used the club's slang term for vehicle, ride, instead of truck. No D'Amico man would make that mistake. She jerked back as understanding hit. Emmanuel reached for her arm, his calm mask slipping to reveal frustration. Grace shoved Lily behind her and stumbled backward. A shot cracked across the dock. Valerio spun toward the sound, spotting Emmanuel's betrayal. Another shot, this one aimed at Grace. Valerio lunged forward, taking the round in his shoulder as he placed himself between her and the bullet. They fell together behind a stack of pallets. Grace's hands pressed against his wound, while Grinder's voice boomed from the remaining rifle nest. Take them now! Valerio's blood was hot against her fingers, his breathing steady despite the pain. His eyes locked onto hers, filled with equal parts fury and relief at finding her alive. Above them, Lily pressed herself flat against the metal walkway as bullets sparked off steel. The morning exploded into gunfire and shouted orders. Grace kept pressure on Valerio's shoulder, both of them wedged behind their precarious cover. She could hear Emmanuel's frustrated cursing as his carefully laid trap dissolved into mayhem. Dawn painted the sky crimson as blood seeped between Grace's fingers. Valerio's hand covered hers, his touch gentle despite everything. They were pinned down, caught in the crossfire, but his grip told her he'd taken far worse wounds than this, and survived them all. The world narrowed to the sound of breathing and blood. Grace watched Valerio's hand clamp over his shoulder wound, his face tightening with controlled pain. He gestured sharply to two of his men, directing them toward the remaining rifle nest with quick hand signals. Bullets sparked off metal around them. Grace scanned the dock, spotting the emergency stop panel for the conveyor system. If she could reach it, she could freeze the whole battlefield, eliminate the moving cover the attackers were using. "Cover me," she whispered to Valerio. Before he could protest, she sprinted across the open space, staying low. Her feet slipped on the dew-slick metal as shots rang out. The red emergency button gleamed like a beacon. She slammed her palm against it, and the entire system ground to a shuddering halt. Movement flashed in her peripheral vision. Hawk lunged from behind a container, knife glinting in the harsh floodlights. Grace stumbled backward, but Valerio was already there, intercepting the blade with his forearm. Blood sprayed as the two men collided. They fought with terrible efficiency. Hawk slashing wild and desperate, Valerio moving like winter itself despite his wounded shoulder. The knife scraped across steel, seeking flesh. Grace watched in horror as they grappled on the wet catwalk, neither yielding an inch. Valerio caught Hawk's knife arm, twisting until bones cracked. The blade clattered away. In one fluid motion, Valerio locked his good arm around Hawk's throat, squeezing with methodical pressure. Hawk thrashed, then went still. The sudden silence felt deafening. Above them, Grinder's position erupted in gunfire as Valerio's men reached the nest. D'Amico reinforcements finally crested the far stairs, laying down covering fire. Grinder's bulk toppled forward, his rifle clattering down the metal steps. Through the growing smoke, Grace caught a glimpse of Emmanuel trying to slip away. But Valerio's cold smile said this escape was anticipated. He pulled out his phone, tracking Emmanuel's movement via something he must have planted earlier. The signal blinked steadily toward the parking lot. Distant sirens began to wail. Valerio's people moved with practiced precision, stripping weapons, wiping surfaces, eliminating evidence. Grace hurried to where Lily huddled behind a container. "We need to go," she said softly. "I won't leave her," Grace told Valerio as he approached, his shirt dark with blood. "She needs protection." Valerio nodded once, sharp but understanding. "The SUV. Now." Grace helped Lily into the waiting vehicle, wrapping her in a blanket from the emergency kit. "I promise you'll be somewhere safe by noon," she whispered, squeezing the girl's trembling hand. "Somewhere they can never find you." The convoy of black vehicles roared to life. Grace pressed a clean towel against Valerio's shoulder as they sped away from the docks. The first pale line of dawn broke over the river, painting the water gold. "Don't you dare die," she told him fiercely, watching his face for signs of shock. "Not on a morning I plan to keep." His eyes met hers, dark with pain but alert. Blood seeped through her borrowed coat where she braced him, but his pulse remained steady under her fingers. The city blurred past their windows as they raced toward safety, leaving the battlefield behind. Lily had fallen into an exhausted sleep, curled tight under the blanket. Grace kept one hand pressed to Valerio's wound, while the other held the girl's smaller one, anchoring them both. The driver took corners fast but smooth, following a pre-planned escape route through progressively quieter streets. Grace cataloged their status with ruthless clarity. Valerio conscious but losing blood, Lily traumatized but physically unhurt, Emmanuel's tracker signal still moving on the phone screen, the sirens fading behind them. The sun crept higher, washing out the harsh shadows of night. In the distance, a medical team would be preparing a secure location for Valerio's treatment. Safe houses would be activating for Lily's protection. The machinery of Valerio's organization was already in motion, containing the aftermath of this night. But here in the SUV, time seemed suspended. Grace felt every heartbeat under her palm. Each breath Valerio took. The morning light touched his face, softening the edges of violence into something almost peaceful. His good hand covered hers where she held pressure on his wound, a gesture both practical and intimate. They had survived the impossible: betrayal, kidnapping, a dawn battlefield. Grace knew there would be consequences to untangle, statements to coordinate, evidence to bury. But those were problems for later. Right now, she focused on the warmth of Valerio's blood beneath her hands. Proof that he was alive, despite everything. The city awakened around them, oblivious to the war that had just been fought in its shadows. Delivery trucks rolled past. Early commuters waited at bus stops. Their convoy blended seamlessly into the growing traffic, just another group of vehicles heading somewhere important. Grace watched the sunrise paint the buildings gold, then white. Each moment carried them further from danger, closer to safety. Valerio's breathing remained steady, his grip on her hand neither weakening nor faltering. They had chosen each other in the chaos, and that choice would reshape everything that followed. The sirens had faded completely now, lost in the normal sounds of morning. Grace kept her vigil as they drove, holding Valerio's life beneath her palms, watching the city transform from battlefield to sanctuary in the growing light. Morning light filtered through bulletproof windows as Grace sat beside Valerio in the safe house kitchen. The medic worked with quiet efficiency, extracting the bullet under local anesthesia. Grace held Valerio's uninjured hand, her thumb tracing circles on his skin. Across the room, Lily slept on a leather couch, her small form wrapped in a fresh blanket. A guard stood watch nearby, alert but unobtrusive. The girl's steady breathing provided a gentle counterpoint to the clinical sounds of medical instruments. The bullet clinked into a metal tray. Grace watched the medic's precise movements as he cleaned and stitched the wound. Valerio remained stoic, but his grip tightened slightly when the needle pierced skin. "Almost done," the medic murmured, tying off another stitch. "Clean through and through. No major vessels hit." Grace studied Valerio's face in the morning light. The dangerous man who had executed Hawk hours ago now looked almost vulnerable, his shirt cut away, his shoulder marked with neat black stitches. By 9, the medic had finished and stepped out. Valerio turned to Grace, his eyes clear despite the pain medication. "I owe you the full truth," he said quietly. "I studied everyone in the club's orbit, including you. I needed to understand the pressure points, the leverage." He paused. "But I never orchestrated Maddox's cruelty at the wedding. And I never—" His voice softened. "I never expected to care." Grace absorbed this, weighing each word. The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen floor as she considered her response. "If we continue this," she said finally, "I won't be your crown, not a trophy or a symbol." She met his gaze steadily. "I'll be your partner, equal say in how we use our power." Valerio nodded, waiting for her to continue. "Starting with the shelter," Grace said. "Full funding, proper staffing, and Lily needs somewhere safe today, not just hidden but supported." "Done," Valerio agreed without hesitation. "What else?" "Emmanuel." Grace's voice hardened slightly. "He faces justice, but quietly, nothing that could splash back on the shelter's legitimacy." Valerio studied her face. "You understand what quiet justice means in my world." "I understand everything now," Grace replied. "And I'm choosing this, choosing us, choosing the mission. But we do it right." He reached across with his good arm, offering her an exit. "You can walk away clean. New identity, new city, full protection." Grace interlaced her fingers with his. "I'm staying." By 11, reports came in from Valerio's team. Emmanuel had been retrieved, the tracker leading them straight to his bolt hole. Within an hour, they had secured signed confessions and digital trails that would dismantle what remained of the club's pipeline. Grace made coffee while Valerio reviewed the documents one-handed. Lily stirred on the couch, accepting a glass of juice from the guard. The girl's eyes were clearer now, less haunted. "The social worker will be here at 2, Grace told her gently. "She's arranging temporary placement with a vetted family while we sort out long-term options." Lily nodded, clutching the juice glass. Will they find me again?" "No," Valerio said firmly from the table. "They won't exist to try." Grace's phone showed 1 p.m. when she stepped into the adjacent office to call the banker from the charity luncheon. The shelter funding would be activated today, providing immediate support for women like Lily. She could hear Valerio speaking softly in Italian to his security chief, coordinating Emmanuel's transport to a secure location. The morning's violence felt distant now, transformed into paperwork and phone calls and careful plans. When Grace returned to the kitchen, Valerio was alone at the table. His shoulder was neatly bandaged, his expression contemplative as he slid a small box across the polished surface. "No pressure," he said quietly. "Only promise when you want it." The ring box sat between them. Understated black leather, holding possibilities neither had imagined days ago. Grace looked at it, then at him, seeing not the Mafia boss, but the man who had taken a bullet for her, who had given her choices when others would have taken them away. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the kitchen golden. In the next room, Lily chatted softly with her guard about favorite books, sounding like a normal teenager for the first time since her rescue. Papers scattered across the table outlined their next moves: shelter funding, club dismantling, Emmanuel's quiet removal from the board. The morning felt both extraordinary and mundane, violence transformed into healing, power redirected toward protection. Grace reached for her coffee cup, letting the ring box rest untouched for now. They had time. They had chosen each other, chosen this path together. Valerio moved carefully to the coffee maker, favoring his injured side. Grace watched him pour a fresh cup with his good hand, noting how he had already adapted to the temporary limitation. His strength wasn't in his ability to fight, but in his ability to adjust, to turn setbacks into advantages. The safe house kitchen filled with quiet domestic sounds, coffee brewing, papers shuffling, soft conversation from the next room. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware of the night's battles or the morning's healing. Inside, they built something new from the ashes of violence. Partnership, purpose, possibility. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the freshly painted entrance of Harbor House as Grace adjusted the ceremonial ribbon one final time. At precisely 10 a.m., camera flashes captured the moment as Lily, the girl they'd rescued 3 months ago, placed the first colorful ribbon on the shelter's wish wall. Her hands were steady now, her smile genuine as she wrote, "Safety," in careful letters. "This is what strength looks like," Grace said into the microphone, addressing the small crowd gathered for the opening. Donors in tailored suits mingled with social workers and former diner regulars, while D'Amico security personnel maintained a discreet perimeter. Her old manager from the Bayview Diner stood near the front, beaming with obvious pride. He'd brought coffee and pastries for everyone, served on the diner's familiar blue plates. The gesture bridged Grace's past and present perfectly. Movement at the edge of the crowd caught her attention. Maddox lounged against a lamppost, trying to project the same swaggering confidence he'd shown at his wedding. But today, his attempt at a smirk looked hollow. When he opened his mouth to shout something, 2 off-duty officers, who'd been chatting with donors, smoothly intercepted him. His protest grew louder, drawing attention. "Sir, this is a private event," one officer said firmly. "Time to move along." "You can't," Maddox started, but the officers were already escorting him away, his impotent anger making him look small. Grace watched him go, feeling the last traces of old shame dissolve. The contrast between his wedding spectacle and this moment couldn't have been clearer. She caught Valerio's eye across the crowd, saw the slight nod of satisfaction. The ceremony continued with speeches and tours. At noon, Grace led Valerio through one of the completed dorm rooms. Sunlight streamed through windows, reinforced with subtle security features, warming the space. "Feel these?" Grace said, running her hand over the plush blankets folded at the foot of each bed. "Better than that stark office of yours when we started." Valerio's lips quirked. "You mean when you taped that napkin to my empty bulletin board?" "Exactly." She touched one of the heavy-duty locks. "Though your security standards haven't changed." "Some things shouldn't." His hand found the small of her back, steady and warm. They continued the tour, Grace pointing out the counseling rooms, the children's play area, the teaching kitchen. Every space was designed for both safety and healing. Valerio noted the careful attention to sightlines and escape routes without commenting. These were discussions they'd had many times during construction. The day stretched into evening, then night. Shortly before dawn, they stood in their penthouse kitchen, the city still dark beyond the windows. A small radio on the counter played old jazz, the sound slightly tinny but perfect for the moment. Valerio pulled her close, swaying to the music. His movements were smooth now, shoulder fully healed. The kitchen lights were dim, casting everything in gentle shadows. "I have something for you," he murmured, reaching into his pocket. Grace felt the cool slide of metal as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Not the first time he'd offered it, but the first time she'd worn it. The diamond caught what little light there was, but she was watching his face instead. "I remain lethal to the world," he said softly, "and tender only to you." She touched his cheek. Tenderness is a choice, one we'll both keep making. They didn't speak of the other choices made these past months. Emmanuel's quiet handover to a tribunal that would handle justice without compromising Harbor, House's legitimacy, the methodical dismantling of the biker pipeline, the normalization of dock operations under new management. Those were necessary endings that allowed for new beginnings. Their partnership was formal now, cemented in both personal and professional spheres. She held voting rights in any venture where her name appeared, while he had expanded his mission to include building rather than only destroying. The balance worked because they'd chosen it together. The sky began to lighten, drawing them to the balcony. They watched the city wake, lights blinking out one by one as dawn approached. Grace's phone buzzed, Harbor House's first intake request of the day. Valeria's hand remained steady at the small of her back as they stepped forward to meet it together. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of coffee from cafes opening below. Traffic was starting to pick up, the normal rhythm of the city establishing itself. From this height, everything looked small and manageable, but Grace knew the reality was more complex. Each day would bring new challenges, new choices between power and compassion. She felt the weight of the ring on her finger, not as a claim, but as a promise. The same promise reflected in the wish wall ribbons, in the shelter's sturdy locks, in every decision they'd made to use their influence for protection rather than just profit. Early sunlight caught the edge of the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The Harbor House intake coordinator would be arriving for her shift soon, ready to welcome whoever needed sanctuary today. Security teams would rotate, donors would review progress reports, and life would continue its careful dance between shadow and light. Grace's phone buzzed again, the intake coordinator confirming details for their first arrival. She turned slightly, Valeria's hand sliding from her back to her waist, and began planning their next steps. The sun rose fully, warming their faces as the city came alive below.